Have you ever heard of HeLa cells? If you've taken a biology class, you probably have. They're a cornerstone of modern medicine, used in research for everything from the polio vaccine to cancer treatments and even space travel. But have you ever heard the story of the woman behind those cells? Her name was Henrietta Lacks, and her story is one of the most important and often overlooked in the history of science. This isn't just a story about cells in a petri dish. It's a story about a vibrant woman, a mother, and the profound ethical questions her legacy raises. So, grab a seat, and let's journey back in time to uncover the incredible life and the unknowing, immortal contribution of Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks was born Loretta Pleasant in 1920 in Roanoke, Virginia. After her mother died giving birth to her 10th child, her father moved the family to Clover, Virginia, where the children were distributed among relatives. Henrietta ended up living with her grandfather in a small log cabin that had once been slave quarters on a tobacco plantation. This was the same plantation her ancestors had worked. It was here she grew up, working the tobacco fields from a young age, alongside her cousin, David Lacks. Life was tough, but Henrietta was known for her radiant smile and lively spirit. She loved to dance and was always impeccably dressed, a bright spot in a world defined by hard labor and racial segregation. She and Day fell in love, and they had their first child, Lawrence, when Henrietta was just 14. They married in 1941 and, seeking better opportunities outside the tobacco fields, moved to Turner Station, a booming black community near Baltimore, Maryland. They found work at a steel mill, and together they raised a growing family. They had 4 more children: Elsie, David, JRB, Deborah, and Joseph. Life seemed to be on an upward track for the Lacks family. They had a home, a community, and dreams for their children's future. But in 1951, everything changed. Henrietta, just 31 years old, went to Johns Hopkins Hospital, one of the few places that would treat black patients at the time, complaining of what she called a knot in her womb. The diagnosis was devastating, an aggressive form of cervical cancer. During her radiation treatments, a surgeon took a sample of her tumor without her knowledge or consent. This was a common practice back then. Doctors often took samples from patients for research, and the laws and ethical guidelines we have today simply didn't exist. No one thought to ask for permission. No one explained what they were doing or why. Henrietta was just another patient in a public ward. The sample was sent to the lab of Dr. George J., a prominent cancer researcher at Johns Hopkins who had been trying for years to grow human cells outside the body. For decades, scientists had faced a major hurdle. Human cells would die within a few days in a lab setting. This made long-term studies impossible. They tried everything, but every sample would eventually wither away. Dr. J's assistant, Mary Kubitschek, labeled Henrietta's sample HeLa, using the first 2 letters of her first and last names. She prepared the cells just like all the others that had come before. But this time, something miraculous happened. Instead of dying, Henrietta's cells doubled, and then they doubled again. And again, they were, for all intents and purposes, immortal. They grew with a ferocity no one had ever seen, doubling their population every 24 hours. Dr. J and his team knew they had something revolutionary. They had the first ever immortal human cell line, a line that could be endlessly reproduced and shared with scientists around the globe. The HeLa cell line was a breakthrough of monumental proportions. Dr. J began shipping vials of these incredible cells to researchers everywhere free of charge. And with that, a medical revolution began. In the 1950s, HeLa cells were crucial for developing the polio vaccine. Scientists used them to test Jonas Salk's vaccine on a massive scale, ensuring it was safe and effective before it was given to the public, saving countless children from the crippling disease. The impact didn't stop there. HeLa cells were used to study cancer, mapping genes and understanding how viruses work. They helped develop treatments for diseases like herpes, leukemia, influenza, and Parkinson's disease. They were instrumental in breakthroughs in cloning, in vitro fertilization, and gene mapping. They were even sent to space on early missions to see how human cells would react to zero gravity. Today, more than 70,000 scientific studies have been published involving HeLa cells, and the number grows every day. They have become a multi-billion-dollar industry, a fundamental tool in labs worldwide. But while her cells were changing the world, Henrietta Lacks was fighting a losing battle. Her cancer spread rapidly. The radiation treatments, the standard of care at the time, were brutal and left her in constant pain. On October 4, 1951, just 8 months after her diagnosis, Henrietta Lacks passed away. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the family cemetery in Clover, Virginia. She died without ever knowing that a part of her was still alive, and that it was on the verge of making medical history. For over 2 decades, her family had no idea. They grieved for a mother, a wife, and a daughter, completely unaware of her scientific immortality. They struggled financially, unable to afford basic health care, while the cells taken from their matriarch were generating fortunes for biomedical companies. The family finally found out in the 1970s, and it happened by chance. Researchers, discovering that HeLa cells were contaminating other cell cultures, needed to untangle the genetic mess. To do this, they needed DNA samples from Henrietta's family to create a genetic map. So, one day, a researcher called the Lacks family. Imagine the confusion. Imagine being asked for blood samples to study the cells of a relative who you thought had been dead for 25 years. The family was shocked, confused, and hurt. They didn't understand the science. They envisioned a clone of their mother, a part of her still living in a lab somewhere. When they learned the truth, it opened a floodgate of complex emotions and ethical questions. Their mother's body had been used without her consent. Her identity had been erased, reduced to a simple four-letter code: HeLa. Strangers were making millions from her biological material while her own children couldn't afford a doctor's visit. The story of Henrietta Lacks, brought to light largely by the incredible work of author Rebecca Skloot in her book The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, forced a global conversation. It raised profound questions about patient rights, informed consent, and who owns our biological tissue. Who should profit from it? Should families be compensated? Because of Henrietta's story, medical and research ethics have changed dramatically. Today, federal laws in the United States, like the Common Rule, require informed consent for most human subject research. Patients now have more rights and control over their own bodies and tissues. The Lacks family's journey for recognition has been long and difficult. In 2013, they reached an agreement with the National Institutes of Health. This agreement gives a family some control over how Henrietta's genomic data is used. 2 members of the Lacks family now sit on a committee that reviews applications for the use of the HeLa genome. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a step toward acknowledging their role as gatekeepers of their mother's legacy. The story of Henrietta Lacks is a powerful reminder that behind every scientific sample, every piece of data, there is a human being with a story, a family, and a life. She was a poor black tobacco farmer whose cells were taken without her consent, yet they became one of the most important tools in medicine, saving countless lives and advancing science in ways she could have never imagined. Her legacy is twofold. It is in the millions of lives touched by the medical advances her cells made possible, and it's in the crucial ethical conversations her story started. Today, Henrietta Lacks is no longer just HeLa. She has a name, a face, and a story that is finally being told and honored. It's a story of medical marvels and moral missteps, of a family's pain and their fight for justice. It teaches us to never forget the human element in science. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. If you found this story as moving and important as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.